You are joining Formats, the platform for grounded local design discourse at SLDF 2022. I hope everyone is having an interestingly exciting day so far. My name is Chamal Paulis, and I'm a second-year student studying visual communication and design at AOD, and I'm grateful to have you at this discussion. Today we are here to discuss cultivating cultural education in society. Without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to someone extremely special. She is a researcher, a writer, a curator based in Colombo. She has an impressive academic record, with her holding both a Bachelor of English from the University of Colombo, along with an LLB from the University of London. She is also an attorney at law. She is the Assistant Curator of Education and Public Programs at the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, Sri Lanka. Please give a big round of applause to Pramodha Weerasekara.
Thank you, Chamal. Emphasis on words was very good.
I'm happy to hear that. To start off, Pramodha, coming from a very diverse background in terms of academics, how did you find yourself in this very unique field in arts?
I think it came from my parents, to be honest, because we read a lot at home. I'm the eldest of three, and basically whatever books they were reading, my parents were reading, I would read them. And I was one of those kids who would get the textbook as fast as they could before the school would give it. And I would go and buy the book from the education department with my parents. And then I would look at the recommended reading list and then ask my dad to go and buy all the books for me. And I was that kind of child. And my parents liked that. My dad read a lot of English. My mom read a lot of Sinhala, which meant I was getting both languages at the same time and at the same pace, which was very nice. I liked that. And I also read, as a family, we went to see a lot of theater and film. I think that's where I got the artistic kind of rigor in me. I'm not an artist by any means, but an interest and enthusiasm in arts was cultivated by that. And however, my father is a lawyer, and he never, he has never told me to be a lawyer. I think he found my diary once and read it, and he said, "You should be a writer." I said, "You shouldn't be reading my diary, first of all." And yeah, and then, but he said, he kept insisting, "You should start writing more." But my school was huge, and there was no such kind of, I didn't feel interested to write at school. Later only did I get into it. So anyway, my mother expected me to be a lawyer. So I told them, let me do arts for A-levels. I was a high achiever. I mean, I would be quite reluctant to admit that, but I think there's nothing wrong in saying I'm a high achiever, because I always got straight A's, and which meant I had options. I could do science if I wanted to, I could do maths if I wanted to, but I just didn't feel passionate about any of those things. So I told my parents, let me do arts for A-levels, and then they said, okay, fine, but you have to become a lawyer. My mom, this was. And I said, no, let me try it out first. So I did literature, and again, I had so many options. Afterwards, I could go to the law faculty, but I said, no, I don't want to go to the law faculty, because law is something I can get from a private university, and if you are able to send me to a private university, please do that. And they said, okay. I'm the eldest, which meant I am very privileged in that sense, because I don't think my younger brother, for example, had the same kind of options that I was given. So yeah, and then I went to University of Colombo to study English Lit. My parents weren't, I don't think they were happy or sad. They were just happy that I got into a local university, because they never got that opportunity themselves. So they just told me, do your own thing. Even now, they don't really understand the job that I do. They just come to the museum and they look at everything. But in that sense, I think even at university, I kept pushing myself to do really, really well. To an extent that, yeah, my parents just told me, you keep doing what you're doing, because after all, you seem to be good at it. Yeah, and I think I've had the luxury of having so many people believe in me. Even when I joined the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art Sri Lanka, it was my lecturer who recommended me to the job. And I joined a very small team. Before that, I had worked at Artra magazine. I had written a lot about, I knew about the art community, and I think SLDF also, Artra in 2018, I think helped co-curate, and I listened to people talk. I was an intern, so I did a lot of running around, but I also got to see people talk, which was exciting. I particularly remember certain personalities like Saskia Fernando and Savera Veerasekara, for example. And that was very nice. Then, of course, I moved on to, right after Artra, I moved on to the museum. Yeah.
In your opinion, how would you and MMCA Sri Lanka define education in terms of modern and contemporary art?
When we started the museum also, we wanted it to be an education-led museum. And what it means is that it's learning as widely as possible. So we say education, and sometimes it tends to throw off people. So I like to look at it as learning, and we're using modern and contemporary art as tools for that, to do that learning. And because I work with schools and higher education institutions also, something I always think about is how would an art student would find it very exciting to come to the museum. But how would a physics student feel if they had to come to the museum? We still have a lot to talk about to them, because art at the museum, we look at it as accessible, inclusive, in a variety of ways. And we want it to be a place where people feel like they've transformed because they've learned so much. And it could be that they know everything they need to know about something, but still they need to feel like, we want them to feel like their perspective has changed about the world, about the society, about arts and culture, about just even a subject that they're studying at that moment as a school student.
As someone with the privilege to go to MMCA Sri Lanka, I think you guys are doing well in promoting that sort of, or opening the scope of everyone, not only design students. So that's very good. That's very good. But moving on, what is your take on our current cultural constructs in Sri Lanka? What needs to be cultivated, and especially as a multicultural, multi-ethnic country?
That's a big question, but I think in my perspective, we need to have more curiosity in this country. I feel like a lot of us are stuck in our own bubbles. And when I first heard, for example, that they want this big curator, Shamini, who is my supervisor, who had moved from the UK and wanted me to work at the first ever Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, I was like, okay, I don't even know if something like this in Sri Lanka could work, but I'm going to give it a chance. So I feel like people need to be more curious, especially young people. You need to be more curious, be more experimental, try new things, and not be afraid of trying new things. I always see that a lot of young people are afraid, or they're worried what the society will say. But I think regardless of what you do, they will say what they want to say. Always. So in that sense, be curious, ask questions, even with artists. So if an artist were to approach me and ask, what should I do next? I would say experiment. Just do what you feel like doing and change things. Or at least try. because we can always try and see how it goes. Yeah.
MMCA Sri Lanka is currently a leading institute that is doing pivotal work for the conservation and dissemination of local art culture. Could you elaborate more how MMCA Sri Lanka works and how your contribution integrates into the work that MMCA Sri Lanka does?
So the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art Sri Lanka is a not-for-profit, education-led museum, like I said before. So it's the first ever establishment like that in the whole country. It's the only one also. So it was set up by a group of art patrons and industry professionals who brought in a lot of knowledge from across the world. And I was one of the first staff members to join. And when I joined, I was told, you have to now work with schools and higher education institutions. I said, okay, it helps that I come from a local university. Also went to a school, local school, although quite a privileged school because it was private. But I think the museum works very well because we have a very research-based approach, especially in the education desk. So there's myself and another colleague. We have a very research-based approach. So when I was told work with schools, we just looked at what were the schools nearby. So we opened at Colombo Innovation Tower on the 17th floor. Some of you might know that. So one of the first things I did was go to the school next door and say, we are opening a museum. And it was very sad to hear that they didn't even know that this building existed. I'm not kidding. And they have a Sinhala school and a Tamil school. I can't speak Tamil, so I had to take someone with me to speak Tamil. But the Sinhala school has only like 50 students, I think. And I said, you have to come. And we opened the museum. The next day, the students were there with the teachers without even telling me. And I got really worried. I said, I don't know what to do. But then I think what was great was that we have young people. I keep saying young people, as if I'm really old. I'm not, I promise. But we have visit educators. So visit educators who could speak Sinhala really took over. So we had done our research. We knew these schools were, there are so many schools, even at our new location at Crescat. So it's very, you have a very research-based methodology, but you take it down to the practicals. It's not enough for me to know that there is a school. I have to go there. And sometimes it's sending a letter. With certain schools, it's sending an email. It's as easy as that. And with certain schools, it's going there, sitting down with them and talking to them. Because even the concept of modern and contemporary art is not something they can fathom very quickly. Whereas, like, with AOD, for example, it was very easy because they know. It's a school that cultivates that kind of education and exposure. So, yeah.
I personally believe that you're doing something extremely positively transformative, and I'm pretty sure everyone here would agree with that. But when someone is on such a journey, they always face challenges. What kind of challenges have you personally faced in your efforts?
Personally, I think a lot of insecurity because I think it's a lot of constant performance, and sometimes when it's, especially when it comes to my writing, for example, I have to think a lot. Like I'll work on like 1,500 word essay for maybe 6 months, which, well, some people will say it's okay, but I don't think it's that great. But I think, yeah, so to think, insecurity is something that we all have to deal with. And I have my own insecurities. And at an organizational level, at the museum, I think one of the things that with especially public programs and working with schools, the past 2 years have not been easy at all. Such a huge challenge. And some of you who know me from there would know how, so events like this I'm very used to, but like I would get really anxious because audience building is not easy. So the past couple of days we held a screening of a Sinhala film. And I didn't know how many people would turn up. And people actually turn up, which is always great. But not every event is like that. And to make modern and contemporary art less intimidating for people, that's always a challenge. Because it's Crescat, it's a mall. They like to come to malls. They don't feel like they have to buy anything. But the moment they see the museum, they think they have to buy a painting. And we say, no, you don't have to buy anything. You can come and see it. Even when we were at CIT, we had to face that all the time. They would think it was such an intellectual space, or they would need to know the artists personally, or they would need to have money to enjoy. And this perception will take a lot of time and effort, not just from the museum, but I think the cultural sector of Sri Lanka to change. So that's a challenge, I think. It's a huge challenge.
Just adding on to that, you mentioned that I feel like a lot of people who are not in the design field or the art field or the art scene per se, they feel intimidated by going into Crescat and seeing the Museum of Contemporary Arts. What kind of things have you done so that they aren't intimidated and they know this is an open space that we can go and enjoy?
So that's something I can speak with each exhibition, our design and our approach to things change, not massively, but quite a bit. So our first exhibition, we did it with less staff. Second exhibition, we improved. And then with new perspectives, with new people joining the team, we always feel like, okay, we know there's something missing, or we have to do something better. That is always great. And one of the things we did was when we moved to Crescat, I'll just give a few examples. I think it's always, if you've been to the space, so with our exhibition design, for example, we decided that the door to the museum, the entrance would be open at all times. During the opening hours, of course. And so we open it, it's a roller door. We open it, we press a remote and it opens at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then until it goes down at 6 p.m., it's open. It's not a door that you have to push or pull. Another thing with public programs that so that's not, exhibition design is not my area, but I always think that this door is so exciting and it's not something I would have thought about. With public programs, what we did was to make the audience feel like they're in an intimate setting where they don't feel uncomfortable. So we always make sure that events are compact so that everybody, not even the resource person, feels like they have to be so intellectual about things and have to speak so profoundly with big words and all of that. Even when an artist comes to speak about their artwork, we would say, how would you, this is what I would tell them, how would you talk about your art to someone who knows nothing about you? Let's take that step first. Then let's go and talk about the artwork of yours that we have on the wall. Because otherwise, what happens is people won't know what's going on, and they would feel like because they don't know about it, they can't engage. And that goes against all the points that we want to make in terms of accessibility, inclusivity, all of that. And another thing we do is, of course, language. Making sure that every Sri Lankan, we are a very Sri Lankan space, so we want to make sure that every Sri Lankan feels included. So we write all our social media captions, a lot of our press. anything we do with exhibition captions, descriptions of artworks, everything is in all 3 languages. So that always makes people feel, okay, this is a place I can go to and read. And even our descriptions, if you've been there, they are very simple. And they make you feel like you are at a place where you can engage. Yeah.
What are key characteristics the educational program at Modern and Museum Contemporary Art Sri Lanka pursue? How does this shape the execution of cultural education?
I feel like I've covered a lot of it now, but I think so accessibility, inclusivity, and making sure everyone has a transformative experience. It's also free. Everything is free. People don't value it much, so I feel like people should start valuing it a bit. But we do have a huge amount of audiences, like amount of people who keep coming back, especially for workshops, because they feel like they are going on a learning journey with each workshop. And another thing is, of course, this is not part of the work that I do. This is my colleague Sanuja, but I thought it was very important to mention this in terms of cultivating cultural education in Sri Lanka. So we have a very comprehensive visitor educator program, which is where we put out calls for any person, basically, with flexible working hours to come and work at the gallery space so that they can have that exposure they need. So sometimes we have artists, very young artists working with us, or students who are perhaps doing something completely different in their studies, but they like to get that experience. We also have a very comprehensive internship program, and it's on rotation. So every 3 months we get a new intern on various aspects. So public programs would have an intern, design, digital would have an intern, our exhibitions curatorial desk would have an intern. So each intern gets very different experiences. So if it's a public programs intern, they'll learn how to do research, but at a very fast pace because we have an execution to do, which is also fast execution because we have to have an event come out of it. So they would get that kind of experience, which means they go out thinking not just about working, they're thinking about cultural education. And even our internal, like full-time staff, for example, we are always, because we have a dedicated learning and training staff member, she always makes sure that we get the best training opportunities. And the company has been, the organization has been very generous in terms of giving us those opportunities. Yeah.
That's lovely to hear. Did you see these activities that you and MMCA Sri Lanka do being adapted in other educational institutes? How does, or is there a potential way for MMCA Sri Lanka to collaborate with these institutes to further push and further transform how our culture and how art and culture is perceived?
Definitely. I think in terms of educational institutions, I feel like there are so many requests coming now for tours or even curated learning experiences for kids as young as 10. I think when we were at CIT, we even did a small visit for, not a small one actually, for like a 2-hour visit for a preschool, which was very difficult to do, but I think we always embrace those kinds of challenges. And another thing is that more teachers, especially art teachers, are understanding that using pastels, watercolor in class, that's not it. You need to make sure that children get opportunities and are exposed to better, not better, but I think more experiences that make them feel like art is an actual option, not just art also. Working in the cultural sector is an option. Because I'm sure many of us would know this, that if someone told you they were working at a museum, you'll be like, what? You work at a museum? What do you do at a museum? Because no one even knows what people do at a museum sometimes. But there are so many things that you can do at a museum. I also think more than educational institutions, I've seen cultural institutions here kind of take the cue from the museum and being like, okay, we are going to now take a trilingual approach. We are going to do talks. We are going to do artists' walkthroughs, for example. Or we have a huge archive. We will show that archive in an exhibition. So there are so many cultural institutions doing so much, and even the Visit Educator program, I see so many different approaches to it. We have taken the Visit Educator approach. I think there are other institutions that take, perhaps, I think recently I saw it was called a mediator. Then another place had called it volunteer. But whatever it is, it's the same. You can call it so many things, but it's that same approach of making people less intimidated about spaces of culture and making things more accessible, whatever is on display. Yeah.
How would design fit in this, or sit in this conversation? How can designers contribute to these efforts, and what applications do you see for design?
I think designers can do so much. This question, when I first saw it, I was like, oh God, I don't know what to say. But I had to think about it. And when I thought about it, I thought, oh my God, there's so much. I personally don't work much with designers other than the graphic designers. But I feel like designers, a good designer has so many characteristics that can be applied in the cultural sector. And I know designers perhaps wouldn't think of working in the cultural sector as the first option. So I think innovative thinking is something that we always look for. And designers have that. I just came to see the exhibition, I think the Reveal exhibition, and I saw some designers who have amazing innovative thinking. And then understanding a problem and giving solutions. I think this is something Chani has also put in my head. She says designers should be problem solvers. And I completely agree. Then also understanding a larger mission. Because you will have so many problems within a mission, and a good designer will always understand that. Being open-minded, being curious. The good designers I've worked with, or the designers I would call good, are always open-minded. So we have worked with designers who don't know Sinhala or Tamil, but have always encouraged us to work trilingually and said, no, whatever said and done, you're not giving up on this trilingual access. So another thing is to think about attention to detail. I feel like some designers have such an amazing eye for things, and to keep promoting that is what we want to do. And even with interior design, architecture, there's so much that you can do in the cultural sector. And at a very practical level, I think I would encourage especially design students to remember that there are jobs in the cultural sector, and we always need you. At the museum, for example, we have several students, I have several colleagues who come from design backgrounds, and they're not doing particularly design work. But they're applying their thinking in their work. So that's what we need. So even me, someone might ask, what are you doing? You're a lawyer. Why are you working at a museum? But I learned a lot of critical thinking by doing law and literature. So that's what I apply at my job. So as a designer also, what you can think is, how do I apply the skills that I have developed in whatever job I do? So, yeah, that would be what I would tell a student, especially. I feel like an auntie, but yeah.
So, Pramodha, before we wrap up, do you have any other closing remarks you want to convey to the audience?
I think these kinds of platforms are great. I think that's the closing remark I want to say. I want to thank Chani, Ray, and you, Chamal, for being so accommodating. I asked for a chair also, and you all gave me the chair because I didn't want to sit on the stage. Yes, and I think please keep doing more of this. I'm so glad about this turnout. Also, it's a Sunday morning. You could all be doing other things, but you chose to be here, which is always great. So yeah.
All right, everybody. That was a very insightful discussion on how to cultivate cultural education in Sri Lankan society. So before we wrap things up, please give a big round of applause for Pramodha here.
Thank you.
One more thing before we close this off. Does anyone have any questions you want to ask Pramodha?
You mentioned that you always ask artists to experiment, but the museum has a research-based approach for public programs. Have you experimented with public programs, and what surprised you the most?
Oh yeah, we have. I have actually spoken to, we call them resource persons, but basically people who have, my research is very much attending events like this, or sitting down and reading. And there are people I have approached and said, you have to do a workshop. And they've always been like, nope, I'm not doing that. I don't do workshops. But I think the way we do things is that, I won't say names, but I think with certain resource people, I've been very lucky. They've always been open to experimenting. So if I've said, all the programs that we do, if it's related to an exhibition, I say, no, we have this artwork. I think you can think about this artwork and develop a concept for a public program. So that's how we do public programs. So they spend a lot of time looking at one artwork. It could be, or it could be multiple artworks in the exhibition. And then they would say, okay, now I'm ready to do the workshop. And another thing I do is I don't rush them. I don't rush anybody to do a workshop or a talk unless they say they're ready to do it. And I think that's what has surprised me. Sometimes they would feel like they're not ready, but I would know that they're ready. And yeah, we've had so much luck in that sense. Surprises always come with the person conducting something, but also with the audience. I think, yeah, yesterday, for example, the film I think I was extremely surprised. And that was very nice to know. Yeah, it was a very nice experience.
Thank you for the question and for the answer. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
You mentioned about going to schools and talking to people. So, how far out have you been? Is it still, are you talking to schools in Colombo, or do you go beyond Colombo and speak to them too? And what's the expectation from the school about the museum? What do they expect out of it?
So at the moment, our focus is very much in Colombo because we feel like there's so much work to be done in Colombo before we go outside. We have had some schools who have visited from outstation. Sorry, oh my God, sorry about that. We have had schools visit from outstation, and usually, I think the expectation from the school is that there are many expectations. One could be that the students learn about art. Another thing could be that they have fun. So if the school tells me we want our students to have fun, like the preschool said they want to have fun, right? So what we did was create a fun learning experience for the students. But if a school tells me, for example, we have many schools coming in where they're studying A-level, for example, the Excel or Cambridge curriculum, or the IDP curriculum, and they want to do, these students learn about all the art movements in the West, but they don't learn about what has happened in South Asia, for example. So the expectation from the teacher would be teach the students or expose them to South Asian, Sri Lankan art. So they might be studying the Renaissance and Rembrandt and Van Gogh, all of that. But what does it mean for them to learn about, I don't know, a contemporary artist like Halik that we have in our exhibition, or Firi, and then go back with that knowledge. So those are some of the expectations that I've encountered. And when a design, so AOD is a school that always keeps coming to the museum. I think almost every foundation batch, whenever we've had an exhibition, has come. So then it's always open up their minds, make them curious. So that's the approach we take. We try not to make experiences boring. It's very open. I always say, put your hand up if you feel bored, and we'll make sure you don't feel bored, or we'll give you a break. So we are very relaxed in that sense. We do have very serious goals, but we are relaxed in the approach, in the execution of those.
Any more questions from the audience?
Hi. So, my specific question is, because you're in the spectrum of art and education, from that point of view, have you considered that I'm from a local school myself? I am a designer, but I absolutely hated art. Because of just the very, I would say, rigid structure that the students are exposed to, right? The only thing I remember learning is about the two-parameter and how it was constructed and how I need to draw that octopus. So how would you, like, have you thought of also getting into the curriculum of art in local schools? And I also, because I went to a local school and a fully private school, mind you, I still didn't get the opportunity to do art as an A-level subject. Because you get 3 subjects, which is GRC, you get logic, and you get some other thing. Definitely design and art is not something that, so have you considered like actually maybe being able to provide that curriculum from the museum?
Yes, so a lot of my work, I can fully relate to you. By the way, at a very personal level, one of my school friends is also here, and I'm sure we both agree. We also come from a very similar background to yours. Very private school, had all the privileges we could have, but I think she and I also bonded in terms of art, but we didn't get to do art much. And we were taught about the Tuparame, and even if you're learning about George Keat, you learn about the murals he did, not the paintings. You learn about Richard Gabriel, but you learn about the murals he did for the church. That also you get to learn only if you're doing A-levels. And we didn't get to do it for A-levels. It's such a rigid structure, so rigid. And at the museum, so over COVID, this was something we realized that we had to do. We opened in a bit of a, we had such less staff. Like I said, we had only 4 of us. Then we slowly became 5, then we became 6. So COVID kind of gave us that breathing space to sit down and look at curriculum. So one of the things I did was read as many school textbooks as possible and see what students are learning. So this exhibition, what we currently have on, came out of some of that research, where I told the exhibitions team, look, these kids are learning about George Keat. They're learning about the 43 group or Bricolette, everybody, they know about modern art. But they're not studying any living artist. So what's happening? And I remember it comes as a bit of a shock to people also. So actually when a school comes in, so especially a local school, even an international school, I would study the curriculum a bit in depth. Especially a local school, if they come in, whatever subject they're studying, I would go and look at their curriculum. Even if the teacher tells me they're coming here for fun, I will say, no, you have to tell me what exactly they're studying at the moment. So if it's a literature student, we would say, okay, what is the text you're studying? Because I know the literature curriculum, I'm a literature student, then I can take that on. If it's an art, if it's a group of students studying art, let's say fine art, like we would do at school, I would ask, okay, what are you using? What is the medium you're using? Are you focusing on watercolor? Are you doing oils, for example? Some schools let students do oils, but some schools don't. So to understand at a practical level what are they doing, and then they come with that, and we start with that. We don't suddenly say, oh, hi, you are at a museum of modern and contemporary art. We would say, tell us what you are studying. Have you been to a museum before? Or is this the first time? If they've been to a museum before, we will ask, what kind of museum? Then they'll usually say National Museum. And we say, no, we are different. Then we'll ask them to point out how they think we are different. So that's the approach we take. And it's a very student-focused approach. With the artworks on display, so it's a very artwork-focused approach rather than an artist-focused approach. That is the difference, I think. I hope I answered your question. Yeah.
Do you have any more questions from the audience? All right. In that case, once again, thank you, Pramodha, for enlightening us with all your work. You're doing very transformative, very positive work for not only us in the design and art field, but for everyone in Sri Lanka in our culture as well. And thank you, of course, the audience for being a lovely audience, taking everything in, asking questions. That's always good. And for everyone watching from home, you can always come over to CIT in Bambalapitiya and join us live and experience a lot of other things. There's graduate exhibitions. We have something called the Boom Room, which is a very interactive space. And of course, our format sessions and discussions and workshops happening here as well. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.